Detective Elias Reaves had always dreamed of this day, his promotion to detective. He had spent years in the shadows of his predecessors, watching as they cracked case after case, each more brutal and twisted than the last. But when his name was called, the city breathed a collective sigh of relief, as if they knew he was the one who would finally bring order to the chaos. The first case that landed on his desk was one that would define his career, or ruin it. It started with a call from the precinct about a body found in an alley, surrounded by a disturbing scene. The victim, a middle-aged man, had been mutilated in a way that didn't seem random. His arms and legs had been arranged in a deliberate pose, with strange symbols carved into his chest. But what struck Detective Reaves as odd were the notes left at the scene. Rules. Rule 1. Never speak the name aloud. Rule 2. Only the marked can die. Rule 3. The truth is a trap. As he stood over the corpse, his seasoned instincts told him this wasn't just a murder, it was a ritual. The markings on the body weren't just random. They were old, and they reeked of a forgotten tradition. Reaves felt a chill creep up his spine as he pondered the meaning of the rules. The more Reaves investigated, the more rules appeared. Another body was discovered, this time a woman in her early 30s. She had been stabbed multiple times, but not in a frenzied way. Each stab wound was precise, each one aligning with a pattern that Reaves could almost make out. As he examined the body, he found the next set of rules, neatly scrawled on a torn piece of paper. Rule 4. Follow the bloodline. Rule 5. When the game begins, it never ends. Reaves felt the weight of these rules pressing on him. Each crime scene seemed like a game he had been forced into playing without his consent. The victims weren't just random targets. They had something in common. Their names had been marked in a strange ledger found at each scene, their bloodlines tied to something ancient, something unforgiving. As the days passed, the rules became more complex, and the bodies kept piling up. But with each victim, Reaves found himself drawn deeper into the puzzle. Each crime was a piece of the greater game, and the rules were both a guide and a trap. Rule 6. The detective is always the final piece. The deeper Reaves dug, the more he realized that the crimes weren't about power or revenge. They were about something far darker. It was as though the killer wasn't just murdering people, but was trying to summon something, to bring about an endgame that would destroy everything. One night, as Reaves sat alone in his office, the door swung open, and his partner, Detective Clara Hayes, walked in with a folder in hand. She had been investigating a separate case that seemed to connect to the string of murders. When she handed him the file, Reaves's blood ran cold. There, in the file, was a picture of his own family. The rules had caught up to him. Rule 7. The marked cannot escape. Reaves had always known there was something off about his family, something they had hidden from him, something that tied them to the ancient rituals he had been investigating. But he never imagined it would pull him into a game of life and death. His own bloodline had been marked long before he had ever become a detective. Suddenly, he understood the true meaning of the rules. They weren't just about the victims. They were about him. He had been chosen not to solve the crimes, but to become part of them. The killer had known all along. It wasn't just about the murders, it was about preparing him for something worse. The final body was found in an abandoned church, the walls covered in symbols identical to those carved into the victims. Reaves knew this was the last clue. The rules had brought him here to the heart of the ritual, and now he had no choice but to face the truth. His family, his bloodline, had been cursed, and now he was the one who would break the final rule. Rule 8. The detective must pay the price. As he stepped into the church, the air grew thick with the smell of decay. Shadows danced on the walls, flickering like whispers of those who had come before. In the center of the room stood the killer, dressed in black robes, a figure too familiar, too close. Reeves's heart pounded as he recognized the face staring back at him. It was his father. "I knew you would come," his father whispered, his voice a cold rasp. "It was always you, Elias. You were always meant to finish the game." Reeves didn't need to ask what that meant. He had already lost. The rules were never meant to be broken. They were meant to be fulfilled. And in the end, there was no escaping the truth. He had been the final piece all along. As his father raised a blade to end the game, Reeves understood that the rules had never been meant for him to solve. They were meant to ensure his participation in a tragedy that had been unfolding for generations. The detective was never meant to win. He was only meant to play. As Elias Reaves stood frozen in the dim light of the abandoned church, his father's figure looming before him, everything seemed to slow. The blade in his father's hand glinted with a cold, mocking gleam. The rules, he now understood, had led him here not just to solve the case, but to become the final piece in a ritual he could never escape. His father's lips twisted into a smile. "You think you have a choice? You think you can stop this?" "No, it was never your decision. You were always the chosen one." Reeves's mind raced, his family, his bloodline. He wasn't just part of the investigation. He was the culmination of every death, every rule, every twisted game. He was part of something older, something far more sinister than he could ever comprehend. Just as his father raised the blade, ready to deliver the fatal blow, Reeves's hand instinctively reached for the gun at his side. But the moment his fingers brushed the cold metal of his weapon, a sharp pain exploded in his chest. He looked down. The blade hadn't struck him. Instead, his father had stabbed him with a piece of paper, a torn, blood-stained page. It wasn't a wound. It was a mark. "Rule 9, his father whispered, his voice low and sinister. "The detective becomes the killer." Suddenly, Reeves's body went numb, and his mind filled with images, flashes of every victim, every crime scene. He saw himself at the center of it all, not as a detective, but as a participant in the murders. He hadn't been solving the case. He had been carrying out the killings all along without even realizing it. The rules weren't just meant to trap the victims. They were meant to trap him, too. The blade was the final key. It had opened his eyes. He saw the truth now, twisted and dark. He was the one who had been marked from the beginning as the orchestrator of each death. Every case he had investigated, every clue he had followed, had been guiding him toward his inevitable role. As the detective who had finally solved the case, he was the one to continue it. The real horror wasn't that he had been part of the killings. It was that he had unknowingly chosen to be the killer. The rules had been carefully constructed, not just to bring him here, but to ensure that he would carry out the final murder himself. His father fell to the ground, his body slumping lifelessly. As the last breath left his father's body, Reeves felt an overwhelming surge of power. The rules weren't just a series of instructions. They were a path to complete the cycle. And now it was his turn to pass it on. Reeves reached for his father's robe, pulling out a ritualistic dagger. The detective wasn't the one who solved the crimes. He was the one who had been grooming them,